Hi guys, my name is Wendy Dale. I'm the creator of Memoir Writing for Geniuses. Today I wanted to talk about how to start out your scenes. Before I get started, just a reminder to hit the subscribe button so you get notified anytime I put out a new video. Let me start out by talking about what you don't want to do. And the reason I'm doing this is because these are the traps that I see lots of writers falling into. One of the things you don't want to do is start by describing the weather. It was a dark and stormy night. There's a reason that this is a cliche, and it's because it doesn't really work. Now, there are some exceptions, and you'll say, Wendy, there are all these best-selling books, there are these classic novels, and they describe the weather in such detail, and it really transports me to that place, and that's really a valid point. So there are some exceptions. If you're writing a memoir that takes place in Antarctica, if you're writing a memoir that takes place in the Bahamas, you know what? We need a sense of the weather. But we don't always need a sense of the weather. So if you're going to describe the weather, what I would say to you is that you really have to go for it. So if you're describing Antarctica, I really want you to give me at least a paragraph that describes the intense cold, the ice, the penguins sliding across the ice, the chill you feel in your bones. If you're going to describe the weather, really describe the weather. Having said that, don't use weather as a fallback. I think I see a lot of writers who don't really know what to write about, and so they think, okay, I'll describe the weather. So don't do that, because that's not really an effective way to start out your scene. Another thing you don't want to do is to describe the setting. Now, I'm contradicting a lot of common wisdom here when it comes to memoir writing. What I'm saying is that not every scene needs to give us a full sense of where you are. If you're writing a memoir about Paris, yes, you probably want to describe the Champs-Élysées in detail and give us a sense of what it's like to walk down the street, what it smells like, the sounds you hear. Absolutely. So I'm not saying to never describe the setting, but again, I'm saying don't use it as a fallback. Sometimes we don't need to know what every place is like when you start out your scene. For instance, sometimes you just take a taxi. We don't have to know what the taxi smells like or looks like. Sometimes you just get into a cab. Final trap I want you to avoid, don't mention everyone in the room with you. So if you're at Thanksgiving dinner, I don't really need to know that you're there with mom and dad and grandma and grandpa and Joe and Christine and crazy Uncle Al. I don't need to know all of this up front. You're just bogging down your scene. Get into your scene, and then little by little you can introduce these characters as they become important. But don't bog down the beginning of your scene with all of these details. I don't really need to know these things. I told you how not to start out your scene, so how should you actually begin writing? One great tip for you is to make a point. What do I mean by that? Well, you make a point such as, my brother and I never got along, or I always spent family dinners as a child in front of the television set. Make any point about your life, about your book. And the great thing about doing this is all of a sudden you have something to write about because you have to defend that point. What do I mean by that? Let me give you a couple of examples. Let's say the point I want to make is Brian was the tidiest man I ever met. Okay, you've made a point. So now how do you defend that point? Well, you could start by saying, the guys who came before him were not at all tidy. There was Jorge who always left the toilet seat up when he went to the bathroom. There was blah, blah, blah. Or you could also say, Jorge was the tidiest man I ever met. And then you could give us examples of how tidy he was. Well, every time he went to the bathroom, he sprayed down the toilet seat with a bottle of alcohol. He wouldn't let there be a dirty fork in the sink. If you start with a point, all of a sudden you have to defend that point. And by defending that point, it gives you something to write about. Let me just give you another example. So I'd never planned on adopting a pet squirrel. So what do you talk about? Well, you never planned on adopting a pet squirrel. So why is that? Well, I'd had other pets in the past. You could tell me about the other pets you'd had, but squirrels had never come into the picture. Or you could tell me that, I always really hated squirrels. I never wanted to adopt a squirrel because squirrels are just like disgusting, horrible creatures that destroy the house. Another great way of starting out your scene is to sum up the main event. If you watched other videos of mine, I've told you that the whole reason that a scene exists is because something has to happen. You are writing to the event. So a great way of getting into that scene is to briefly mention the event, and then you can start telling your story from the beginning. So how do you do this? So the very first sentence of your scene is something, let's say you're talking about a car wreck. So the first sentence will say, the day I got into a car wreck also happened to be Valentine's Day. Okay, good. So I've summed up what's going to happen in my scene. Now I'm going to start telling the story from the beginning. So the second sentence will be something like, the day started with an e-card from my mother. I walked into the office and it was decorated with hearts and flowers. So again, sum up what's going to happen in your scene in a sentence, or you can even use a paragraph. But you start by briefly summing up what you're going to get to, and then you go back to the beginning of the story. My Valentine's Day started by getting an e-card from my mother. To sum up, there are a couple of great ways of starting out your scene. One of them is to make a point. When you make a point, you immediately have to defend it, and it gives you something to write about. Second tip, summarize what's going to happen in your scene. Give us the event, and then you can start telling us the story from the very beginning. I hope you found this lecture inspirational when it comes to your own writing. If so, please be sure to hit subscribe. My name is Wendy Dale. Happy writing.